ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaste, my dear friends. This is video number 20 on Vivekachudi of Adi Shankaracharya. This video starts with the heading "The Perceived I Factor False." And it starts with verse number 293. Sarv Atmana Drishyam Idam Marisev Neva Hamarthah Akshani Katva Darshanat Jana Mehem Sarvamiti Pratitihi Kuto Hamade Akshani Kashya Siddhet. The objective world is quite unreal. Neither is the ego real, for it is seen to be fleeting. How then can the apparent I know all be true of the ego, etc., which are momentary? From the standpoint of the Absolute, all that we see and experience, the entire OET is false. From the standpoint of the waker, all that he saw in the dream is false. Not only is the world unreal, but even the ego, the I, is unreal. They are unreal because they are momentary. The concept of I changes every moment in childhood, youth, middle age, and old age, in the dreamer, waker, and deep sleeper. Every moment there is a different concept of I. The objective and subjective worlds too are constantly changing. Yet we say, I know, I have the experience, etc. This can only be a false, delusory notion with respect to the ego, etc. If there be a set of continuous experiences, then there must be a changeless factor in you which knows all changes. The world of the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s has changed. You, as an individual of 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60, have also changed. Yet you say, I know, which is the factor in you which, as a child, experienced your childhood, as a young man, experienced your youth, and as an old man is now experiencing your old age. Childhood, youth, middle age, and old age are the different vicissitudes of life. What is that great truth which, functioning through all these, has the experience of all of them? It is the self. It is in its play that we cry out, I have experienced all these. Stanza 294. अहम पदार्थ वह मैदाक्षाक्षी नित्यं सुसुप्तावपि भावदर्शनात् ब्रूते हय्यजो नित्य इति श्रुतिः स्वयं तत्प्रत्यगात्मा सद्विलक्षणम्. But the real I witnesses the ego, etc. It is always there, even in deep sleep. It is unborn, eternal, says Shruti herself. Different, therefore, from the gross and the subtle is Paramatman. The real sense of I, Aham Pada Artha, is the one which is the witness of the ego and the objects and their changes. The subject and the objects both are recognized by the consciousness which is one's real nature. When I say I was unhappy when my wife died, I am conscious of my sorrow now of the wife's death some time back, and also that it was me who was unhappy. I am conscious of the I of its environments and of its experiences. The subject, the objects, and the experiences are all known by me. This consciousness in me is eternal and real, Nitya. Never is there a time when it is not. Even in deep sleep, we are conscious of the nothingness. The Upanishad says this great truth is unborn, eternal. This great reality, which is the inner self, is something other than the subtle and the gross. Come to apprehend it. This is the anxious exhortation of Sankara to his students. Stanza number 295. Vikarinam Sravikar Nitya Vikaro Bhavitam Samarhati Manorath Swapan Susuptisu Safutim Punah Punardast Satvametayaho. That which is the knower of all changes in all things which are liable to change must doubtless be eternal and changeless. Again and again, the unreality of the gross and the subtle bodies is clearly perceived in one's fancy, dream, and deep sleep. The knower of all changes must itself be changeless. The knowledge of all modifications must be beyond all modifications. The BMI are subject to change. The only changeless factor is the subject who is the knower of all changes. The knowledge of the changes must be something other than the changes. This changeless factor is constantly with us, even in deep sleep, hence it is eternal. The gross and the subtle bodies are always the known as they are constantly seen and experienced. Therefore, they are not real. Their unreality can be clearly understood by analyzing our own experiences of imagination, dream, and deep sleep. The moment I start dreaming, my waking body is not available. In my dream, my enemies torture me. They drag me all over on my back. When the fifth hot plate is being placed on my back in that terrible agony, I wake up only to realize that the hot water bag in my bed is leaking. When I was dreaming, this body was not true. When I wake up, that body is not true. Is any one of the bodies true? No, both the bodies are unreal, because in deep sleep none is available to me. Thus, when you analyze your experiences, honest to your scientific observation, you must come to the conclusion that all that changes is unreal. When you analyze your waking, dream, and deep sleep experiences, it will be instantly clear to you that the subtle and the gross bodies are not real at all. Here, the term real means that which remains the same without change in all three periods of time. Therefore, stanza number 296. अतो अभिमानं त्यज्ये मांसपिण्डे पिण्डाभिमानित्ये अन्यपि बुद्धिकल्पिते काल कालत्रय्याबाधैव खण्डबोधं ज्ञात्वा सौ आत्मनामुपैहि शान्तिम्. Therefore, reject your identification with this mass of flesh, with the ego or the subtle body, both of which are the imaginations of the intellect. By realizing your own self, which is absolute knowledge, which cannot be denied in the three periods of time, attain to the state of supreme peace. Do away with your superimpositions. This has been repeated in many of the previous verses. How does one deny these entirely? Now, therefore, says Sankara, renounce your identification with this mass of flesh. Renounce here means give up your vanity, abhimana, that I am this. You need not renounce money or house or wife or position or status. Even if you have renounced all these and yet you are anxious about this body, all your renunciations are useless. They will return to you in a very short time wherever you are. The ego, which has the vanity, I am this body, is nothing but an individual's intellectual estimation of himself. Renounce both the body and the idea, I am this body, then the ego will be eliminated. Having renounced, thus come to experience the unbroken knowledge which is unconditioned by the three periods of time. This unbroken knowledge, Akhand Bodham, is always present in the past, present, and future. Understand this eternal reality as your own self and come to experience the supreme peace. Stanza number 297. त्यजाभिमानं कुलगोत्रनां रूपासुरं दृश्य वा आश्रितेषु लिङ्गस्य धर्मानपि कर्तनातार्दि सत्यक्त्वा Bhavakhand Sukh Svarupah. Renounce your identification with family, lineage, name, form, and order in life, attributes of the body, which is like a foul corpse, so to renounce your ideas of agency, etc., attributes of the subtle body, thus become the very essence of absolute bliss. The vanities, Abhiman of family, lineage, name, form, and order in life, etc., belong to the body which is perishable and rotten. The vanities of doership and enjoyership belong to the subtle body which is always changing. Renounce these vanities and experience the nature of the unbroken bliss which is the eternal self. Here, the main obstacle in leading a spiritual life has been indicated, and the strategy of how to meet efficiently this obstacle has been pointed out. In the following verses, Sankara points out other minor obstacles and show how each one of them can be avoided by an intelligent readjustment of our ideas and actions. Condemnation of the ego. Stanza number 298. संतन्ये प्रतिबन्धः पुंसः संसार हेतवो दृष्टः तेषामेकं मूलं प्रथम विकारो भव अत्यङ्कहार. It is observed that there are other obstacles also which hurl men into a whirl of births and deaths. Their one route for the reasons given above is the ego, the first modification of ignorance, the superimpositions of the not self on the pure self, and then a firm identification with the gross and subtle bodies are not the only obstructions in man's attempt to realize his peaceful self. There are other causes too, like desires, etc., which bring about mental agitations, causing the perception of the pluralistic phenomenal world. Desires, passions, lust, greed, jealousy, etc., are all causes for more and more sorrows of men. They tie him firmly to the rack of chains, to the wheel of births and deaths. The root cause of all this is the ignorance of reality. The very first modification of spiritual ignorance is the ego sense in us. Had I not been there, there would not have been any sorrow. If I am not there, nothing else can be. As long as this I exists, everything else exists. This I is the very first effect of ignorance, most appropriately called nescience. Ignorance expressed in the body and mind is called I. Therefore, the renunciation of this I is insisted upon. Then the individual is liberated from the bondage of his vasanas. There are no more any fruits of actions affecting the individual. If there be effective fruits of actions, there must be somebody who has performed the actions and is the enjoyer of their fruits. When the ego is not there, then what is bondage? Bondage where? Who did the actions? Who enjoys or suffers the results or reactions? If I have committed murder and a warrant of arrest has been issued, the policeman comes up to my door to execute the warrant. But to whom will he serve the warrant if I have died last night? For the crime perpetrated by me, I must be hung. Admitted, but when I am dead, what can the state do? At best, the authorities can only note on the warrant the criminal is deceased and therefore the file is closed. What else can anyone do? Similarly, if the ego is not there, what can the fruits of actions do? All the fruits of actions that have not been enjoyed become burnt in the fire of knowledge, say the Vedanta textbooks. Stanza number 299. यावत्सया तैवस्य संबंधो अहंकारेण दुरात्माना तावन्ने लेशमात्रपि मुक्ति वार्ता विलक्षणा. As long as there is any relationship with this vile ego, so long there should not be even the slightest talk about liberation, which is unparalleled. As long as there is even a slight identification with the wicked ego, there cannot be even a talk of liberation. Liberation is so unique, vilakshana, that it will not suffer even an iota of any other mental preoccupation. It must be everything or nothing. If it is sought with a total mind, it is gained forever. If the mind is not turned towards it totally, it can never be experienced. Stanza number 300. अहंकार ग्रहण मुक्त है सब रूप मुपद्यन्ते चंद्रव चंद्रव दिवमल है पूर्ण सदानंद है स्वप्रभ. Freed from the shackles of the ego like the moon freed from the eclipse, man gains his true nature and becomes untainted, infinite, ever blissful and self-effulgent. He who is liberated from his ego attains his true nature. Shankara uses a simile of suggestive words to remind us of the idea of Rahu. The physical body and its identifications are shadow thrown upon the Supreme. When this identification is withdrawn, the Supreme stands revealed in its own self-effulgent glory. Stanza number 301. यो वा पुरे सो है मिति प्रतीतो बुद्धया परकलितृप्त सत्यमसाति मुड्ढया तस्सैव नैशेषतयः विनाशे ब्रह्म आत्म भाव प्रतिबंध शून्य. The ego is that which has been produced by the intellect, which is deluded by nescience, and which is perceived in this body as I am so and so. When this ego sense is totally annihilated, one attains an unobstructed identity with Brahma. The identification with the gross is a powerful imagination of the intellect, which is rendered supremely foolish by the veil of tamas, avidya. This deluded intellect, which cannot see the reality, imagines and projects the concept of I am so and so. Based upon this fanciful stupidity, one builds up one's ego sense. This ego has to be destroyed until not even a trace remains. When this egocentric concept that I am so and so is completely annihilated, there is the realization the self in me is the self present everywhere. Brahm Atma Bhav. That feeling full understanding without any trace of doubt that the self in me is the one self everywhere is called realization of the Supreme Self. So long as the ego sense persists, prompted by its natural personal bias, dvandva, suffering under its ultimate propensities, vasanas, it lingers, interpreting a world of its own and confusing itself with the multiplicity perceived around. When the ego ends, ego centered and society centered drives no longer affect the individual, and this state is the experience divine. Such a realized one testifies to a depth dimension in experience that defies speech and thought and yet provides a more realistic experience than any sense impressions. This is the state of realization when the veil of tamas avidya is lifted to reveal the truth eternal, the self in all. Stanza number 302. ब्रह्मा आनंद निधिर महाबलवता अहंकार घोराहिना संवेष्ट आत्मनि रक्ष्यते गुणम यश्चित चंडेलसी मस्तकई विज्ञान अक्षय महासिना श्रुति मता विच्छिद्य शीर्षतरियम निर्मूल ही मिमम निधिम सुकरम धीरो अनुभोक्तुम अक्ष्मः. The treasure of the bliss of Brahma is enwrapped by the mighty and dreadful serpent of the ego sense and jealously guarded for its selfish use by its three fierce hoods, the three gunas. The wise man who destroys it by severing its three heads with the great sword of realization in accordance with the teachings of the scriptures alone can enjoy this treasure which brings bliss. In the serenade of his poetry, Sankara brings in the refrain of what has already been said. The treasure of the infinite bliss of Brahma is kept secret in the undisturbed cave of the physical body. This treasure is being guarded by a serpent, the ego sense, the individuality. Individuality is represented by a serpent in all religions. The serpent that tempted Eve, the serpent upon which Sri Krishna danced and destroyed, the serpent in the holds of the peacock, the vehicle of Lord Subramanya, the serpent that is worn as an ornament by Lord Shiva. All these represent the ego sense, which is the stockpile of all our stupidities. This powerful, terrible serpent, the ego, protects the treasure trove of blissful Brahma Ananda, for its own selfish ends. This ego coils around the treasure and protects it. This ego, Ahankar, in us will not allow us to realize the state of Brahmananda. It expresses itself at all times through one agitation or another. A triple-headed serpent is this ego. Its terrible hoods are the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. This serpent can be destroyed only by the sword of direct perception. Vijnana, by no other means can we end the ego. The ego can be ended by the sword of knowledge, forged by direct perception, which is gained through a sincere and intelligent study of the scriptures. The Shruti says the self in you is the self everywhere. That experience alone will end the ego. There is no other instrument, no other way to achieve this. With such an instrument, let us cut off the three hoods of this fearful serpent. Tamas can be ended with Rajas, Rajas by Sattva, and Sattva by finally and by itself. The ego has to be thus annihilated, plucked by its very root, Mula, make it rootless, Nirmula. Man with discriminative intellect, having destroyed the very root of the ego by the sword of knowledge gained by the study of Shastras, enjoy the treasure of the bliss absolute. Stanza number 303. या वद्वा यत्किञ्चिद्वेषदोषस्फूर्तिरस्ति चद्देहे कथमार आरोग्य भवेत् हन्तापि योगिनो मुक्तै. As long as there is even a trace of poison left in the body, how can one hope for complete recovery? Such root is the effect of the ego sense upon the meditator's liberation. If there is even a little bit of poison in a man's blood circulation, how can that man be healthy? The ego sense, ahamkar, is the poison in spiritual existence. How can the meditator yogi who is striving for liberation gain it if the ego sense of the body is still persistingly lingering in him? Therefore, this ego must be completely rooted out and annihilated. Stanza number 304. Aham antannivirtya तत्कृत नाना विकल्प संहर्त्या प्रत्यक्त तव विवेकाधि मैं समिति विन्दते तत्वम्. By the complete cessation of the ego sense gained by restraining the diverse mental waves created by the ego itself, and through the discrimination of the innermost reality, one experiences reality as I am this. When you are living as the ego, it cannot but create various mental agitations of endless varieties of vanities of family, race, name, form, wealth, learning, etc. When this ego is totally ended, the vanities arising from it also end. The ending of the ego is the realization of the supreme state. This supreme state is not realized as something other than the meditator himself. It is realized as one's own self. I am this self will be the nature of this total realization. When the dreamer realizes the waker, the experience is I am this waker. The final spiritual experience is subjective, personal, direct, and full, always as one's own real nature. Stanza number 305. Ahankare कर्तर्य हमिति मतिम मुंचे सहसा विकार आत्मन्ने प्रतिफल जोशी सवसिति तिमोसी यद अध्याय सात प्राप्ता जनी मृत्यु रादो दुख बहुला प्रतिशिमन सत्वः सुखतनो संसर्तिरियम. Renounce immediately your identification with the ego sense The sense of agency, which is by its very nature a modification and is lit up by a reflection of the self. It diverts one from being established in the self. Identifying yourself with this false sense, you have reached this relative existence full of the miseries of birth, decay, death, although you are the witness, the essence of knowledge, bliss, absolute. I am the doer, Karta, and I am the experiencer, Bhokta, are both the expressions of the ego, Ahankara. This constant feeling of I am the ego has to be dropped immediately. This ahankara consists only of the various thought disturbances, manovritis. When the light of consciousness illumines the thought waves, you become conscious of the thoughts. Those conscious thought bundles in their totality constitute the ego. The ego is the consciousness reflected in the thoughts. Chid abhasha. Therefore, when the thoughts cease, the ego also come to an end. Because of this identification with the thoughts and the consequent ego sense, one has no chance to experience the infinite beatitude even for a moment. The infinite beatitude, Chinmurti, is your own nature, yet you are not able to recognize it. You are an embodiment of this bliss form, Sukhatanu. All these confusions arose from the mind's projections. When you assert that you are the mind, all the imperfections of the mind become your imperfections. Birth, death, old age, etc., and sorrows of endless varieties come to you. This is called sansar. I, identified with the ego, gets blinded and hence has no experience of the self, which is of the form of the light of consciousness, Chinmurti. I, identified with my physical body and the attitudes of my mind, superimpose upon myself various sorrows and imperfections such as birth, growth, decay, disease, death, and then due to them suffer endlessly. This is called the miserable life, sansarithi. Sansarithi, which is the lot of all. You are not this, you are that infinite consciousness. Come to apprehend it yourself. So the Upanishads thunder forth. Stanza number 306. सदैकरूपस्य चिदात्मनो विभोरानन्दमूर्तेरन्वद्कीर्ते नवन्यथा कवय विकारणनिस्ते विनः मद्दयसामुस्य संसरति. But for your identification with the ego sense, there is no transmigration for you who are immutable and eternally the same knowledge absolute, omnipresent bliss absolute, and of unsullied glory. For transmigration, repeated births and deaths, there is no other cause than the ego sense. Your essential nature is consciousness. Bliss Ananda is your birthright. Yours is the untarnished glory. You are the one at all times without any modification. There is no reason why you should stupidly suffer so much and so continuously. Sankara is advising the disciples here. You are that. You are suffering because of your own agitations. The agitations are caused by the ego in you. In the gross and subtle projections, the idea I am this is the only cause that makes you suffer. Hence, give up this tragic and ruinous ego sense, ahamkar. What is what is to be done next is advised in the following verse, stanza number 307. तस्माद् अहङ्कारमिमं स्वशत्रुं भोक्तृगर्ले कण्टकवत्प्रतीतं वच्छिद्य विज्ञानमहासिना स्फुटं Bhug aksva matsa braj sukham yatheshtam. Therefore, with the great sword of realization, destroying this ego sense, your enemy, which is like a thorn in the throat of a man who is eating, enjoy directly and freely the bliss of your own domain, the majesty of the Atma. The teacher is now suggesting a simple throat operation. If a thorn is sticking in the throat, one cannot appreciate any food which otherwise one could have enjoyed. The ego is like a thorn in the throat of an eater. Hunger is there, food is also ready, but the hungry one cannot eat because the painful thorn is in the throat. Similarly, the bliss of the infinitude is everywhere present. We fail to enjoy it simply because of the ego sense in us. To remove this ego, an operation has to be done. This surgery can be done with the instrument of the experience of reality alone. Once the sense of ego is removed, we are at liberty to enjoy the empire of the self as we like. All we have to do is remove this little ego, the misconception that I am this body, a bundle of filth. At this moment in all our experience of life, this thorn sticks in our throat and makes it difficult for us to enjoy the bliss of the Atma. Therefore, all our enjoyable experiences reach us as sorrowful ones only. Stanza number 308. Tatoham made vinirvarte vartim संत्यक्तरागः परमार्थलाभात् तूष्णीं समास्थित्वा स्व आत्मसुखानुभूत्या भूत्या पूर्णात्मना ब्रह्मणि निर्विकल्पः. Checking the activities of the ego and renouncing all attachments through the experience of the supreme reality, be free from duality through the enjoyment of the bliss of the self and remain serene in Brahma. For then you have attained your infinite nature. It is advised in this verse that all the thoughts connected with Ahankara are to be given up. The vanity of race, caste, creed, learning, status in life, etc., are all connected with the ego sense. Renounce all desires and gain the supreme goal. The price to be paid for the experience of the reality is a total renunciation of the entire range of all desires. Having given up the desires, keep quiet, not physically. The mind and intellect are to be quietened. If the mind and intellect blabber, it is only because of the ego and its egocentric desires. When the ego and ego-based thoughts have been withdrawn, the desires end. When desires are no more throttling the mind, it becomes quiet. The thoughtless mind itself is Brahma. This is the experience of Supreme Truth. Param Artha. This is the gaining of the Supreme Self. Thereafter, the mind and intellect will have no more desires to be fulfilled through selfish actions. The sadhak reaches the state of quietude, tusni bhava. There he experiences infinitude, which is one nature divine. Come to realize this quietude. Why does Shankara repeat his advice and instructions? He himself answers in the following. Stanza number 309. Samul kertu api mahan ahem punah व्योलेखितः शाद्यदि चेतसा अक्षणं संजीवः वीक्षे शतं करोति नभसवता प्रावर्षि वारिदो यथा. Even though completely rooted out, this terrible ego sense, if revived in the mind, vyolekitaha, even for a moment, returns to life and creates hundreds of mischiefs like a cloud ushered in by the wind during the rainy season. People bemoan I was much better last year. This year I don't know why I have again fallen in my spiritual sadhana. Such complaints we hear every day, everywhere from almost all seekers. This is all due to the play of the vasanas and ego sense. Sankara warns us here, even though you have ended the ego along with its roots, the vasanas again it can revive and rise up to tyrannize over you. If you allow your mind this freedom, then the play of the ego sense will start again. Therefore, beware. When the ego is reborn, revived from its burial ground, and starts reasserting itself, a thousand varieties of agitations will immediately rise up. As long as you have the ego, the world of objects, emotions, thoughts can never be satisfactory by itself. A thousand varieties of agitating desires and worries must necessarily come up to dance in the mind. The ego will create storms in the bosom, thereby the peace will be lost. In the rainy season, the clouds are all driven away in a moment, and yet the next moment we may find the sky cloudy again. The breeze that removed the existing clouds brings in its next windy dash a horde of new ones. The sun shines brightly at one moment, and the next moment it is hidden again behind the newly gathered clouds. So too the mind is at one moment steady in prayerful meditation. Next moment there is a gush of thoughts which dashing the brilliant poise of the mind at meditation make it full of agitations. Generally, you feel more distracted when you come out of the puja room than when you went in. All this is because of the devastating play of the ego. Therefore, beware, conquer the ego and continue with the alert vigilance of a successful conqueror. Never think that the ego has left you permanently. It must have only receded to the background. It can come up again if you slacken your diligence. Actions, thoughts, and vasanas. Renounce. Stanza number 310. निग्रह शत्रोहम अवकाशः कवचिन्ने देयो विष अनुचिन्तया स एव संजीव हेतुरस्य प्रक्षिण जम्बरहुत. I think I should conclude this video at this stage because topic is changed. So thank you for watching this video. Next video will start with the topic actions, thoughts and vasanas. Renounce. Stanza number 310. Thank you. Namaste.